Welcome to Studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we've discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great Lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda.
And Charles Richard.
And today we have a special guest, once again, brought back my daughter,
Angelica Drozda.
And the topic today is one of those controversial topics. It's on creation and evolution. However, before we get started, the reason Angelica's in here is because she spent an entire year, right, Angelica?
Yeah.
Researching and studying for a capstone. A capstone at her high school is where the seniors research, present about a 30-minute presentation, approximately.
15 minutes presentation with 15 minutes of questions by the faculty and some students.
So they have to answer those questions, and all of this has to be done and passed at each phase, along with how many page paper did you have to write?
I think mine was
25?
24, 25.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
So at least a 20-page paper they have to write along with it. So Angelica, tell us a little bit about your thesis.
Yeah, okay. So my thesis is the Church grants Catholics the freedom to accept evolutionary explanations concerning the origin of the human organism, understanding that a creationist view of the world founded in a literalistic interpretation of Genesis can be scandalous to the faithful.
Okay, wow.
That's
All right.
great.
Thank you.
Really impressed.
So when you opened up and you talked about that there's a problem and why this is a problem and why you're addressing it.
So I open up with a national study from 2015, which involved 4,000 teenagers and young adults. And its mission was to figure out why young people are leaving the Catholic Church. 36% of the participants ranked a perceived antagonism between modern science and the Catholic Church as a major reason why they left the church. So I'm opening up with, there's a problem here, a misconception exists with the church in conflict or contradicting modern science, and because of this misconception, people are leaving the church.
That's a very, very Dominican kind of topic because, of course, the Dominican order was founded by scientists and people like Albert the Great who saw science and faith as complementary, not in conflict at all.
That's right. And so she goes on to say some of what are your did you have three major points you were making?
Yeah, so I begin my capstone with covering how the church interprets scripture creatively, not always literalistically, literalistically as in the most basic interpretation of the words, or I think that it was St. Augustine or St. Thomas would say the proper sense of the word. And so I look back at St. Augustine's interpretation, specifically focusing on the literal meaning of Genesis, his book on that, because he spent around 15 years of his life looking into Genesis, trying to interpret it literalistically, and concluding that he could interpret it only in a creative manner. And so I start with him because showing that the church has an openness to this interpretation, creative rather than literalistic. And then I just went over what the church does teach on creation and evolution, and explicitly saying that she does not teach against evolutionary theories that don't contradict church teaching. And then in conclusion, I was to prevent scandal, so making other people fear, being part of the church or wanting to leave the church because of other people misrepresenting the church because of creationism, that we ought to understand what the church teaches for ourselves, and then in an appropriate situation, guide others to her truth.
So when you say scandal creationism, what you mean is that when some people will say you have to believe in 6 literal days and of creation and the way it is written in the Bible, then that can cause some people to have trouble thinking that, well, it kind of appears in our world and in science that things have evolved to some degree somehow. And so it doesn't sit well with some people who are out there saying you have to believe this to be a good Christian or Catholic. And clearly the point of this discussion is to say that we need to know Catholic teaching on this, what it is, and how the church can guide us on that. And clearly from the time of St. Augustine, as you're quoting, in that he didn't believe, he didn't feel like we had to believe that. So he set a precedent.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point, because it's important to remember that throughout American history and even in the present day, there are denominations of Christianity that insist on a literalist approach to Scripture, what we might call fundamentalist, where the words of the Bible are meant to be taken absolutely literally, that there was a literal Garden of Eden and a talking serpent and all the rest of it. And, you know, certainly there have been plenty of Catholics in the Middle Ages and before, you know, who did take those stories literally. But that's not necessarily the official teaching of the Catholic Church, the way that it is for a number of other Christian denominations. And, of course, this all came to an especially big climax with the Scopes monkey trials in American history that people are often familiar with, that Christians did pit themselves against science in the Scopes monkey trials. And it really revealed the flaws in the thinking of people who take the Genesis story literally.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and say it also revealed other flaws, though. I do think it revealed flaws in the way the science was being interpreted and misplaced onto, because I think that part of the concern of the preacher, which I don't remember his name right now, Charles.
It was William Bryant and
William Bryant.
I can't remember his opponent,
but I know that the one that was saying this shouldn't be taught was also concerned that it was being used as a race superiority thing. And so some of I think it's been painted both ways in the wrong way. And that's why we have to tread carefully about it, right? And Angelica, you had a very difficult question. One of the faculty members asked, you know, about how, when we feel troubled because it has been misused, how can you console some of the people doing that?
Yeah, so basically anyone can take any idea or teaching, even if it's true or scientific, and misapply it to situations that just wasn't designed to be applied to. And people have taken the what's it called?
Like the
survival of the fittest aspect of Darwinian evolution and misapplied it to
superior race.
Yeah, and like their social Darwinism and the like. And because of the bad things that people have done with the theory of evolution, or like, you know, specifically Darwinism, it makes people have like a bad impression of it. And so sometimes they're scared to accept it as a scientific theory for what it is actually supposed to be applied to. And so basically I was like, you have to remember that science will only reveal truth, and truth ultimately is God. And just trusting that the more we know from science, the more we can really understand God himself. And also, if this person is Catholic who's questioning like evolution and stuff and whether we can accept it, I pointed into in my capstone like to Pope Pius XII's encyclical Humani Generis, in which he allows Catholics to continue research and discussions concerning Darwinism as it deals with human evolution, specifically of the body, because, there are two critical church teachings that no matter what evolutionary theory you want to adhere to, you have to keep in mind. It's that the human soul is made directly by God, so it cannot evolve, and it did not evolve. And that Adam and Eve were the first man and first woman who committed the first original sin. And as long as as those can exist within like whatever scientific theory that, modern scientists propose today that, is revealed by, true science, truth, then it's not going to contradict our faith and we can accept it.
I also think the misapplication is due to some of the science that wasn't quite on target. And we have to realize, and Angelica, you mentioned really well in your talk, to go with a scientific theory and run with it without being humble and ready and docile is really, really dangerous. To go with God is never dangerous, but to go with a scientific theory can be a bit of a danger, because we find in science that 10 years, 20 years down the road, those theories get completely obliterated and new ones have to come in place and I think the Neo-Darwinism that you showed in your paper, Angelica, has a lot of differences and a lot of openness to different ideas involved that were more complex than the original sort of walk of man idea that is not it's not a truth.
Right. So, evolutionary theory can become, and has in many cases, can become just as dogmatic and rigid as the folks who take the Genesis story literally and insist on only that kind of reading. The church has always looked at truth, the principle of non-contradiction. Truth is truth. It doesn't, the truth that we learn from science does not and cannot contradict the truth that we receive through revelation and faith. Truth is simply truth, and there are different ways of approaching the truth. One of the great Dominican traditions, going back to Thomas Aquinas and his era, was the recognition of the truth that had been uncovered by pagans like Aristotle and Plato and others, and they weren't afraid of that. They were able to look for what was true in the teachings that come to us from outside of the church and reconcile them with the true teachings of the church. And it's the real problem is dogmatism that is unnecessary, both on the part of science as well as among fundamentalist believers.
Yeah, I would definitely say that people who take a creationistic approach, which is, taking everything in Genesis like literalistically, there's a fear from that of like not having all the answers, because science doesn't have all the answers when it comes to evolution right now, and the truth is we never will. And science continues to develop, and we do continue to learn more and more, but both sides, both creationists and people who accept, Neo-Darwinism or evolution, need to recognize that you won't have all the answers, and you have to be humble enough to admit when you're wrong, or admit when either your interpretation of scripture is not correct, or that a theory that you once thought was true isn't anymore, or maybe animals or creatures developed in different ways than we had thought before. Just being able to be humble enough to accept that, when you're mistaken, and docile so that you can be formed by the information that you receive, and then just trust in God ultimately. There's no need to be afraid of what science has to tell us, has to reveal to us.
And at the same time, when you're hearing things in science, we know that you have to take that with a grain of salt, just like we were saying.
Yes, the science itself evolves as new information becomes available, and questions are raised and objections are raised, and these are the rational ways that people attain to truth. And as I said before, this is actually a very specifically Dominican notion of finding truth through disputation, for example, through argumentation, through the weighing of evidence, and all of these things should show us that science and theology rightly placed together, are not contradictory.
And speaking of Dominicans, you're listening to Studium to Studio with the lay Dominicans that are out of Our Lady of Wisdom in Lafayette, Louisiana. And we are here by the generous support of Stein Lumber. And we want to thank them and also thank Christ Our King Catholic Radio for Acadiana, 90.5 FM, 99.5 FM, and 12:30 a.m. So today we're talking about creation and evolution, but we're doing it in an open sense. We're not giving an answer to that. We're saying that don't put parameters that aren't necessary. Is that right?
That's certainly how I see it. And scientists themselves, even those who are not theists, are recognizing and have been recognizing for some time that the original understanding of Darwinism doesn't account for all of the evidence that's out there, and that these theories, scientific theories, need to be flexible. And the church, at its best, values flexibility in deciding controversial or difficult issues, which is why I think you're right. Pope Pius XII identified what is necessary to the faith, and what is negotiable. And he made those decisions in a way that would leave as much flexibility for scientific development and theological development as possible.
Yeah, so they're like guidelines for Catholics to explore different theories, but giving them that, I guess, support or like of knowing, as long as, I adhere to these teachings and these theories don't contradict that, then I'm free to explore it,
Mm-hmm.
So you also mentioned, Angelica, in your talk about Pope St. John Paul II. He, it was one of my favorite quotes, so I want you to, do you have that?
Yeah, so in a 1996 interview, Pope John Paul II said, after affirming evolution, specifically like Neo-Darwinism, as a viable theory, he says that in truth, rather than of a theory of evolution, one should speak of theories of evolution, just trying to remind Catholics and everyone to remain open-minded. Not one, and I've heard scientists read articles they very much believe that one theory can't account for all the different parts of evolution, and that's okay. There might be multiple theories.
And I'm going to let that cue me up on one particular theory that I came upon 20 years ago. And I feel like that it's something that is under discussed, and yet it's not a proven theory either. But it was sort of tossed underneath, and it was by a man named John Davison, and it's called the semi-meiotic mutation theory on a alternative theory on macroevolution. And one consideration that he had, this is just, again, I'm no scientist or whatever, but it seemed very appealing to me on a logical note and on a theological note, because these are things, if we're open to, when we hear them, they may reveal God more to us than we realize. But he believed that in order to change the number of chromosomes, so 46 chromosomes
Yes.
Humans have, in order to change the number of chromosomes, you can't make small genetic changes. This is a number that's on our chromosome, and it has to be done in sort of a reproductive phase. So his as a biologist and zoologist, he came up with this theory and tested some things and saw that it's possible that if there was a mutation with different number of chromosomes in a female who was producing eggs during oogenesis, they could, because they split during mitosis, after meiosis they split, and they have polar bodies that have all the same genetic material. If something causes those, and we've seen that it can in a lab, cause them to be reabsorbed, you can actually give birth by a virgin birth. So the mother could actually give birth to 2 or 3 of another, by that mutation of another species. And so I thought, I know that sounds, everybody's probably like, what? But it is an actual, I guess, some science behind it, and the theology behind it really fascinated me because it would take a virgin birth to make all things new. And I thought, wow, how would that be if that was proven true? And the actual process in that area of evolution would actually show God's hand even more in our faith.
Yeah, that's to borrow a line from Shakespeare. There's a lot more under heaven and earth than our philosophies have dreamed of. And the theories of evolution are constantly being revised. So in an earlier time, people believed that these were all gradual processes and so forth, until the evidence from the fossil records indicated that changes happened in some cases very suddenly, very dramatically.
Leaps,
yes.
Rather
than gradual evolution. And so all of these things simply point to the fact that we don't have all the answers yet, and we may never have all of the answers. But there's good in seeking out the truth through science and as well as through prayer and meditation.
That's right. So, Angelica, at the end of your talk, you give a quote from St. Augustine, and I think that would be really helpful to share that quote. It's about, well, I'll let you do the quote.
Okay, yeah, this is St. Augustine from The Literal Meaning of Genesis. This is how I ended my capstone. Quote, "It often happens that even a non-Christian has views based on very conclusive reasons or observations about the earth, heaven, the other elements of this world, the motions and revolutions or the size and distances of the stars, the eclipses of the sun and moon, the cycles of years and epochs, the nature of animals, of plants, of rocks, and similar things. It is a disgraceful and dangerous thing for an unbeliever to hear a Christian, presumably giving the meaning of Holy Scripture, talking nonsense on these scientific topics, and we should take all means to prevent such an embarrassing situation in which people show up vast ignorance in a Christian and laugh it to scorn." End quote.
Wow, how relevant that remains today. I mean, that was written, of course, in the 5th century, in the 400s, and here we are in the 21st century, and that advice still holds just as true today because those same sources of scandal still exist.
So I guess definitely if people are in a teaching role or some other role of authority, it's fine to share your thoughts and views, but as long as, but not to condemn or belittle anyone for their view on creation, no matter what their approach is. Really, it's just good to open the discussion, though, and that's, I think, a hard thing for people too, right? Just being able to discuss, and also, one thing we're talking about is not being in either box, so to speak. People want to put you either in a literal creation box or a Darwinian evolution box, and they think they know what those mean, and that's the end of. But really, there's a lot of space in between those boxes, and I think that's really where truth always lies, right? Not in those extremes, and that's what.
Yeah, we should always, and I'm saying this as an educator, I think that we need to be wary of people who reduce arguments or investigations such as these into the nature of creation, those who want to put things into an either-or category, because it's a false dichotomy in most cases. As you say, there's a lot of room between those things. And so as Catholics, we try to look at the world with a both and rather than either or way of approaching questions that arise.
And the fact is, we'll never really know about creation because nobody can go back to that time. We can only investigate so much about it. Truly, it is a mystery that we will know, in heaven. I mean, this is something we will know when we see God face to face. And so it's not something that can be totally solved. It's just something that we can converse and learn more about. And it does, kind of shape culture if we don't think about it and discuss it a little bit. Do you have any other thoughts, Angelica, before What'd you feel about having a capstone your senior year, actually?
Yeah.
Was that a good thing?
Yeah, I really appreciated being able to delve into something that I was interested in, and got to do the research. And I didn't enjoy it all the time, and write a paper on this topic, because I remember junior year where we very lightly touched on the topic of Darwinian evolution, and I had a lot of questions, and so that kind of what sent me going in this direction for my capstone to study. And I learned a lot, and the virtues that we were talking about earlier of humility and docility, I feel like I had to experience as well, because I realized that my previous ideas of even some church teaching about creation and science were incorrect. I'm like, okay. And then the docility to be open to the new information that I receive by watching videos, reading articles and books and whatnot.
Well, one of the things that ultimately these discussions or even debates about how to interpret the Genesis story or Darwinian approaches to evolution, all of that is getting at the same question, which is, what does it mean to be human? At what point do we become human? What is it that makes us human? And these are profound philosophical questions that have all kinds of applications. You were talking earlier about how evolutionary theory has sometimes been used to support racialist ideas and ideas of racial superiority. Even today, it applies to questions of the unborn. What does it mean to be fully human? And at what point are we human? Now, we as Catholics, we have some very clear beliefs about those kinds of things. But nevertheless, the discussions about creation always seem to come back to this question of what is it that makes us human? And in the end, it's our relationship with God that makes us human.
And Angelica, one quote now that we're at the end. The thing that you were talking about in the Bible at the very beginning of your talk, which was on, someone commented on the dust of the earth and the breath of God. Can you share that quote? Because I think that would be a great way to finish out our program, because it's...
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So this is St. George Jackson Mivart. He's a British biologist. He lived, around or during Darwin's life. He's not actually a saint. That was just part of his name. But he writes this: Scripture says that God made man from the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. This is a plain and direct statement that man's body was not created in the primary and absolute sense of the word, but was evolved from pre-existing material, symbolized by the term dust of the earth, and was therefore only derivatively created, in other words, by the operation of secondary laws.
Very good. That's exactly. And then, of course, the church tells us then that God gave us the soul. It was God that gave us the soul. It wasn't something that came from this. These are two, clearly in that, there are two parts of man, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the body and
We're
the soul.
hylomorphic.
That's right. So we'll finish with that. And
well, congratulations, Angelica,
you.
that you had this kind of opportunity to do a deep dive into something that was really important to you.
and took the challenge and did a great job.
I enjoyed it. It was fun.
So remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace. God bless.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death, and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word. A shotgun blast was the last thing I heard.